Hi, I'm Lee Marsden, and I just wanted to give you some feedback about our first public screening of the British Muslim Values Project, which took place last night. The venue was right in the heart of Norwich City Centre in the Forum. Really good facility, the auditorium, which is curved, and so it's ideal. Good acoustics, absolutely ideal for being able to have conversations across the room. And we certainly got plenty of conversation, plenty of interest in what was going on with the project. Now, there's about 67 people turned up. Halloween, so outside they had to run the gauntlet of zombies and ghosts and ghouls and what have you. But people did attend and did take part, which was great news. You're always a little bit nervous about these events, about whether you're going to get 3 or 4 people, but 67 is not a bad number. All different nationalities, religions, ethnicities as well, and we felt it reflected a good cross-section of the Norwich public. Obviously self-selecting in the sense that they had come specifically to watch the screenings. We were particularly fortunate to have 3 of our 4 filmmakers in attendance. So the format basically for the evening was that the researchers kicked it off. Lee Jarvis spoke about the project, the importance of the project. We then had the screenings of the 4 films. Now these were quite different. Challenging in different ways and taking different perspectives. What we've done with the project is basically just handed out cameras to individual Muslims and asked them to think about British values and what it means to be a Muslim living in the east of the country, and to get on with it. So we weren't prescriptive in any way, and this leads to a whole different sort of way of actually looking and approaching the issues. So the first film that was shown, Muqaddam Malik produced this film with shooting shots of 3 head-to-head sort of conversations with 3 different people who live and work in Norwich, and had their different perspective. What came through with that was quite interesting, in the sense that the whole notion of British values is something which was very much questioned and little understood as well, which is hardly a surprise. I think we all probably struggle with this term and this concept. But this did come out extremely well, I think, in the films. We then had a film by Mo Amin, and Mo's film was quite different from the other 3. There's no narrative involved at all, and what he did was rather cleverly to juxtapose Quranic verses with iconic sort of imagery from around Norwich itself. And so he used the cathedral and the castle, the 2 sort of big cultural icons of Norwich, and demonstrated, I think, very, very cleverly the similarities between those Quranic verses and how they're sort of being talked about and expressed within the architecture within this city. So very thought-provoking, and it did produce a very good response. We then had a film from Leela, one of our Bedford contributors, who is talking to a young woman who'd migrated from Afghanistan some years ago, and about her experience. Now that was very much sort of on the basis of accepting this idea of British Muslim values, and again expressing the similarities between that and the religion. There's no sort of real engagement in the sense of sort of challenging the notion of British values, but sort of an acceptance of that term and the uses for it. And so that, again, very, very interesting indeed. And the final film was by Kudra Goodall. And she's second generation Muslim. Her parents are Irish and British, and converted to Islam. And so a really personal story shared with her sisters and various friends around Norwich about what it means to live and work as a Muslim within this community. Now, following from that, we had opportunities for discussion, and the filmmakers were central to that, very articulately expressing both their thought process but engaging with questions from the audiences. I guess one of the things which emerges from that is just the idea of the toxicity of this term British values. I mentioned earlier that we all have difficulty probably sort of trying to understand and extrapolate exactly what's intended for that. There's a sense from the audience, which I think we as researchers would probably share as well, that this term is heavily loaded. It's a construct, it changes over time historically, and to sort of confine it to the narrow confines of the Home Office sort of idea of democracy, rule of law, individual liberty and tolerance for all faiths. Well, who does that exclude? Who does that include? And are those values any different? And so there's a real sense, I guess, from the meeting that this is a heavily laden term. A lot of people were put off from the project simply because we use this term, and I don't think it's sort of clear, because we are really determined to allow the filmmakers and to the participants to be able to speak about this, rather than sort of having our own agenda in terms of how we define the term. So that was interesting that came out as well. Another issue which came out was the whole idea of conflict as well, and were the filmmakers sort of aware it wasn't very conflictual, the reportage that took place, really, in the sense that people were talking about tolerance, about being accepted, and no sort of real sense of conflict between this confrontational sort of title, I guess, between what it is British values and Muslim values, and are they the same? And can you actually have this sort of dichotomy, really, between the two? Are they sort of at war and conflict with one another? And I think they certainly answered that very well indeed. And I think this conflictual nature hasn't really come out in the films as such, but as the filmmakers responded, this is because the people they were talking to, it wasn't an issue for them. So it'll be interesting to see how this sort of develops within focus groups that we're going to have as well. The other issue which came up was the idea of culture, religion and nationality. How do you sort of marry those together? Some comments about difference between Iraqi Muslims and Pakistani Muslims and British Muslims, people indigenous to this island. And so those issues sort of got discussed, quite heated at times, but very interesting for all of that. And then finally, I just wanted to sort of share a few thoughts on the filming process, as briefly as I can. I think what happens when you sort of give a brief like this, where just go and make a film about British values and about being a Muslim living in the east of the country, then it has a lot of risks attached to that, and that you're not directing and sort of being specific about where you want the focus. But it also does mean that an image is presented that the filmmaker wants to present, which perhaps doesn't tell the whole story. And so again, the focus group is going to be useful to be able to try and unpack that. We ended the evening with people obviously free to leave, but people stayed around and chatted for half an hour or so. And we also did some vox pops as well. So I've not had a chance to look at those as yet, and Lee Jarvis and Aileen Mattick and myself will be looking through those, and we can then sort of go from there in terms of how we're going to sort of use those in the focus groups. People also filled out questionnaires as well, and on post-it notes just thoughts about what British values means to them. Anyway, that's the latest update. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch up with you again soon. Okay, thank you.